I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit today about how I see communications playing a part in how modern businesses work, especially in the digital age and beyond. So quickly, to introduce myself, I'm Daniel Yin. I head up product management and innovation for RingCentral in Europe. And let me introduce RingCentral, I guess, as well. So here's a bunch of semi-interesting numbers. We are the world's biggest and fastest growing UCaaS provider. What does that mean? And specifically, what do RingCentral do? We build cloud communication solutions. So that's everything from telephony and PBXs through to video conferencing, audio conferencing, collaboration platforms, through to digital engagement and contact centers. And we pull all of those functions, all of those kind of rich communication functionality into a single platform for businesses. And we're also the fastest growing pure UCaaS provider. So we've got some pretty good growth momentum in the industry today, and some pretty good accolades as well. So this is the Gartner Magic Quadrant from last year. A new one comes out hopefully in a couple of months, but you can see RingCentral, we're placed furthest to the right, furthest to the top in the leaders segment. So pretty good validation from the industry that we are very good at what we do. So hopefully that'll convince some of you guys as well. And who do we cater to? Well, I think hopefully anyone who wants communication solutions. But very, very interestingly, and perhaps unlike some competition, we're extremely happy to work with businesses of any size, through from single home offices, and I'm guessing none of you here are single home office people, but through to multinational enterprises of 40, 50,000 users plus. So very scalable solutions as well. So what are we going to talk about today? So I wanted to give, and by the way, guys, this is a pretty small and intimate audience. If you've got questions, thoughts, please shout out. Extremely happy to receive questions throughout as well as at the end. But I wanted to share with you kind of some views on how communications changed and how it needs to adapt to keep up with modern workforces, modern ways of working. And I think the people in this room very much have driven very big changes in the way people work, and communication solutions, if they haven't already for your businesses, because I know that we have some of our customers in the room, but for those of you who haven't, those solutions do need to keep up with the way your businesses work. So let's start with a quick kind of spot the difference. So these are kind of just semi-funny images of offices from 40, 50 years ago. But there's a lot different in the way people work then compared to now. So there's some really obvious ones. So look, these guys, they're analog. They're doing all their work on pen and paper. They're all in one room. They're wearing suits and brogues. And that's really different to how pretty much all modern businesses communicate and operate and work today. So for one, I wear jeans pretty much every day when I work. Still wear kind of leather shoes, but look, people work from lots of locations. I would place a guess that every business here in the room today, every business that you guys work with, are multi-location. You don't live in just one office. You probably upsettingly, work from home a reasonable amount as well. And the sort of numbers and types of media you work across are vastly more numerous than they used to be. It's not just pen and paper. You've got computers, you've got video, screen share. And all in all, right, and maybe I'm labouring the point, but it's an extremely different working environment. And kind of what we focus on and kind of what we net that down to for communications is kind of these four pillars and these four different categories where we see the most amount of change and the most significant pieces of change. So one, mobile. And I don't just mean that we work from and with mobile phones, but that as a workforce, we're a lot more mobile. So every one of you in the room today, I imagine, is keeping in touch with what your business is doing. But you're here, you're physically somewhere else. So people are mobile. And it's not just traveling salesmen and traveling executives like yourselves. It's very, very much the ordinary workforce as well. One of the biggest shifts we've seen in the workforce is in home working and flexible working. So, especially in public sector where there's a drive on cutting down office space, number of seats, hot desking. Part of the workforce is going to be remote. It's going to be working from home or just in separate offices. And when you're physically spread out like that, you need a communication solution that enables those modes of working. So, you can't, for instance, put someone working from home, and enforce that policy without giving them, a full set of tools to stay in touch with colleagues. And by the way, that doesn't mean just giving them a mobile phone, right? There's a lot more to communications than that. Two is global. And while businesses have always been global to some extent, we're seeing more and more businesses have global outreach and multiple offices be an absolutely core part of their strategy, whether that means expanding into new markets or whether it means outsourcing things like development resource or contact center agents. Global has become a big part of most or many companies' strategies. And that in itself brings, we found, a lot of communication challenges. Thirdly, multimodal. So what we very much found, and I'm sure you all have experiences from your personal lives, but you don't just use a single device anymore. You can't just bring your black binder to track all of your working life. You have, I imagine, a myriad of devices. Maybe you've got a personal Mac or a PC at home. You've got a work computer. You've almost certainly got a personal smartphone. And some of you might even be running a second smartphone, a work device. And, you might log on from a console anywhere in the world, on the open internet, and want to use your own business services. So, you've already got, up to 5 or more separate devices that you want to access your tools and potentially then, your business communications from. And lastly, always on and social. So one of the big changes we've seen in kind of people's attitudes to communications is that they expect people to always be available because you've always got a personal mobile, you've always got a routable number that you can be reached on, and what businesses we find need is a way of managing that kind of constant stream of communication. And we find that goes hand in hand with social platforms. And actually what we see is that social and consumer technologies have played a huge part in how people perceive communications technologies, but probably also in the technologies themselves. So I imagine, these apps, these logos are extremely familiar to everyone. I hope they are. But I think, to me anyway, there are 3 kind of really interesting highlights within how consumer and social technology plays a part in business communication. So one is that actually a lot of these platforms are extremely rich and extremely powerful communication platforms in their own right. So if you look at an app like Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp, they've got a lot of cool stuff. You can do group conversations extremely easily. You get persistent history. You can upload pretty much any type of media you want via them. And you've also got some really cool value-add technologies, like you can share location in real time and track your friends, your family's location. This is all really really useful, really powerful technology. And what we've very much found is that businesses, kind of a reversal from some other sectors, really haven't caught up with the same adoption of these features and these same technologies. We work with, and I imagine this is a problem that you've all faced somewhere, but maybe a show of hands, who here has had a problem in doing something as simple as sharing a file with a colleague or an external contact, right? Yeah, that's 50 or 70% of people in the room. And we work with a FTSE 100 company, and you would expect, and they themselves are a communications expert, and I wanted to share a file with them, and they said that they couldn't receive a file over 10 megabytes, the limit of their email system. And that the best workaround for them would be to use a personal device to receive a file on a file share, or for me just to send them the file on WhatsApp. That state of affairs for a massive public company is pretty unreasonable in my view. And one of the things, and certainly these guys are changing the technology, but I think they're also really changing the perception as well. If you get a better experience with your personal tools that are by the way free as well for the most part, personal data theft aside, that's a pretty poor state to be in as any business, let alone a FTSE 100 company. So number two is that these social platforms, especially the ones with a lot of outreach and a lot of users, have a real impact on businesses themselves. This isn't just in enabling communications, but the amount of publicity you get on some of these platforms has a massive and very real impact on your business. So, the classic example is just a bad review on Twitter. Somebody with a lot of followers gets a lot of public engagement, and that can be extremely damaging or conversely extremely positive for businesses. The biggest example that I saw was actually two companies on here, so Twitter and Instagram. Not Instagram, no, I mean Snapchat. And Kylie Jenner, I'm sure you're all hugely aware of, top of everyone's minds, she posted that she didn't like the new Snapchat interface, and that more or less overnight took, and the following articles that kind of commented on this and said, is this really true? Is this what everyone's thinking? That lost Snapchat $1 billion in market cap over the course of 24 hours, right? So some celebrity, someone who, I'm going to go ahead and say it, I don't particularly care about her, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way, but her thoughts and views on another app have wiped $1 billion, right? That's more than most of us will earn in 100 lifetimes, $1 billion in revenue. And so I just wanted to put in your heads quite the impact that social presence and our ability to handle social media can have on our day-to-day and operational business.
And how long did you see that particular effect happening though? Because I know that from a number of cases wherein the agent is peer view, but it's normally a short-term impact rather than a medium or long-term.
Yeah, it's very fair that some the impact of some social statements are very transient. And stuff goes in waves of sentiment, so that's very true. But I think there are also a lot of cases where, rather than be a facilitator of trends, what these platforms are doing are bringing previously unheard of scenarios and situations to people's attention. So, a better case of that might be, American and airlines. They've had a whole spate of negative press about how their staff have mishandled passengers, stuff like that. That's, rather than just being sentiment driven, that's highlighting real problems with an industry and a business, and they haven't recovered yet in quite the same way that Snapchat might have had a bounce back. But it's a very fair point. I'd argue as well that it is important to address even transient issues like that. Though. My kind of third observation on this set of apps and this set of different social and communication channels is that there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of crossover in functionality there as well. So, personally, I find that Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp have extremely similar use cases and more or less the same set of features. And it's just been a set of coincidence that I end up using Facebook Messenger to talk to friends and WhatsApp to talk to family. There's no good reason for that, but it's just how those social circles have ended up. But what I definitely find is it's a massive chore to manage multiple different apps and multiple different conversation streams. And that's very much what we've found is a problematic scenario in business communication too. So switching to the business world, business communication world, this is kind of just some output of talking to knowledge workers, so professional workers, mostly who work on computers, mainly desk-based types of jobs. And what we found, actually, these numbers kind of baffle me a little. I mean, these sound pretty extreme. Not the ones on the left. Having 4 communications apps, that's, I imagine, pretty familiar to a lot of people. But it's this challenge in switching applications and the effect it has on productivity that really surprised me. Switching. I mean, no doubt that switching between apps costs you time, but apparently adding all of that up over the course of a year adds up to something like 32 days of man days, person days of work time, right? That's approximately a 1/7 and 1/8 of a working year, purely apparently wasted switching between applications. That's a staggering statistic to me. Whether it's completely accurate or not, I'm not sure, but the fact that a study can even give you that number to me says quite how potentially damaging the setup is of communication apps in businesses today. And what about other types of workers? So to me, the other crucial kind of productivity-based worker is based in the contact center. And we found very similar statistics in contact centers. Huge number of agents find that switching back and forth between apps to get the right information to talk to customers, resulted in an hour a day of these kinds of productivity loss. And maybe unlike knowledge workers and professional workers who are quite sort of task-driven and outcome-driven, our take is very much that contact center workers and agents in particular are more time-bound. It's about 9 till 5 working shifts. So these kind of productivity losses are real potential business impacts to businesses. So maybe summarizing some of those problems. So we've got a challenge in the way businesses work. Completely multimodal, mobile and global companies that potentially don't have communications platforms that are able to meet those kind of new shape of working needs. We've then got a lot of time, pure just time wasted between different apps, switching context, and pure productivity loss. And 3, there's this really interesting impact that social has on our businesses and some learnings from the features that they provide. So how do we solve that? And actually, do we need to solve that? So here's a stock image of robots to help form your views on those. I don't know why a robot needs a headset. It's baffling. Poorly designed. And this is a great intro to my kind of next point, which is, so why do we talk about this? Why is it important to businesses? And why can't we just solve communications issues? Because communications kind of is very natural to everyone. It's how we interact with all of the people, even when we're remote. We understand how and what we need to do to communicate. But I'll stand here all day and talk about cool features. I love the technology. A lot of you guys as tech leaders may feel the same way. But ultimately what we find is that, like pretty much any business, we are very bound to the business itself, the business case, and rather than just throw features and cool technology at people, what we find is that we always need to justify the cold, hard business case here, rather than just talk about cool technology. And ultimately, businesses don't just care about communication solutions. You've got 101 other things that you need to do. Communications is probably somewhere near middle to bottom of your to-do list in a lot of cases. So what we've very much found is that updating the communication, and this may be old news to a lot of you, but updating your communication systems rests very heavily on the business justifications and the business outcomes that a communication system can deliver. And the very simplistic world that we see and we look at looks something like this. Two kind of general areas. One is your own employee base, the people working for you and within your business, making them happier, improving their experience, and bottom line, saving them time and increasing their productivity makes them happier, makes them do more stuff, and high level, that improves your bottom line. On the other side, there's a very similar argument for your customers, the people you talk to, the people you communicate with. The more that their experience improves, the more that the happier they are because of the way you communicate with them, the better the outcome for your business as well. And just digging down into the nitty-gritty, the details, we kind of identified a few key areas where we think that communication system changes directly impact the business case you can put together. So employee engagement, that's really about your users, the tools they use. They want a collaboration tool to make them or to help them work more effectively. Two, flexible working practices. You need communication systems that enable those kind of working environments. Those flexible working hours, who actually cares if your knowledge workers are doing 10 till 6 instead of 9 till 5, making them happier and giving them the tools to do that by working remotely, to be able to talk to anyone, video call anyone, share files remotely. That makes them happier and leads to lower churn of your base. And boosts is spelt wrong there, but productivity boosts due to a better experience, integrated tools. Let me move on. I think I'm running a bit slow on time. So the net of all of this is that we see the world working a lot better if businesses are using just one communication tool. And spoiler alert, I believe that RingCentral is probably the best tool out there. But as a general takeaway, fewer communication systems are better for your company. Just one, perhaps the best, as long as it meets all of your business's needs. This is the way RingCentral see that world. So we've talked very much about the customer engagement world, tools that reach out to end customers, contact centers, and digital engagement, but then also employee engagement, the tools you use to collaborate and communicate within your own business. And we actually see them very much colliding. One of the ways we see that is that the kind of media and content that you typically want to share internally, files, voicemails often, and asynchronous messaging. Well, actually, in a lot of cases, that's the sort of communication you want to have with your customers. Really at a really simplistic level, when I communicate with a colleague, and then switch to communicating with a potential customer, the modes in which I communicate don't change. I'm going to talk to them and I'm going to share content with them. And in an ideal world, if you're empowering your business, the same technology base should be leveraged to both so that you've got the same features, rich functionality across all of those experiences. And this is kind of how we break down that world. We kind of see these as the key things that exist within an engagement side, as well as the customer engagement side, as well as the employee engagement side. So the top right there, cloud PBX, telephony, is kind of still what we see as core to internal company communications. It's quite hard to escape telephony as a pure business need. But then we see team messaging and collaboration, so asynchronous messaging between individuals as well as teams, as well as content associated with that, so file share, link sharing. That's all become probably, and certainly within RingCentral, the primary mode of communication. But then also some very powerful real-time tools, so video and screen share and real-time content share. On the customer engagement side, we see kind of two use cases, maybe three, splitting them up. Contact centers, both inbound, so receiving communications from customers, and then also outbound and campaigning for things like prospecting. And then last of all, probably the most interesting and sort of newest piece is digital engagement, which is RingCentral's way of interacting with social media, which, like we were saying before, quite a big business influencer. So the way RingCentral aim to kind of solve these problems at a high level is to empower the workforce. So putting the tools in their hands, not only cleaning up that experience, but stopping the barrier to entry from using a communications product. One of the comparisons we like to make, and I'm sure everyone does for their own products, is to an iPhone. So you used to get phones, I don't know, 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago, and used to get a manual for how to use it, how to switch it on, how to use features. Well, an iPhone gives you a one-pager. Here's how you turn it on. Here's how you interact with things. We're done. That's it. And our view is very much that business communications should be as easy as that to pick up and use. So that's one side of it, making it easy to use. But the other is that it obviously needs integration into a full business environment. So that's integration with all the sorts of typical business environment tools you've got, single sign-on, integration with your productivity suites and CRMs. And just very quickly, a view of how we see that experience looking for actual end users, people who are consumers of the actual communication solutions. Well, we aim to deliver just one interface for all your users. So you can kind of see there in some of the images that you've got all your communications in a single stream. So not just your chats and your messages, but also you've got telephony powered from that same interface. You can uplift that to a phone call and then to a video call. And the idea of that being to replace having a phone, maybe WebEx, maybe Slack, 4 or 5 different applications on your desktop, all fundamentally just empowering your communications. You should all be running it through one interface. Cleaner, simpler, easier to use. And then on the customer engagement side, RingCentral Engage is what we call kind of our latest product in this space. The idea behind it is to facilitate digital engagement with any sort of social media platform, but manage and operate all of that from one place. So no matter whether you're talking to someone and they're reaching out via Twitter, via LinkedIn, via WhatsApp for Business, you can kind of consume that via a single pane of glass and respond via a single pane of glass. And kind of the best way to understand that I've seen is kind of an example. This is a real story from one of my colleagues. He's the sort of traveling exec who wakes up and doesn't know what continent he's in, and he's frequently arranging and rearranging flights. He tried to rearrange a flight for the next day, and he reached out to our travel booking company, one via an email and 2 via Twitter, because he wanted something public. He thought he'd get more receptivity from them. And he got responses back from both in good time. But what he got via email was a, hey, no, we actually can't change your flight for tomorrow. It's already locked in and you've paid for it. But on Twitter, he got a really public response saying, hey, we'll do everything we can. I'm sure we can fix that. And actually, in the end, he got back a response saying, yeah, we'll change that. And what's wrong with that story? Well, yeah, kind of obviously, he's had a terrible experience. He doesn't know what to believe. because he's gotten two very different answers. But from looking at the company's point of view, the shoes you guys might be in, you've actually, and our travel booking company had burnt twice the amount of resource they needed to responding to this customer, while still making them very unhappy with that experience. So, kind of the lesson that we've taken away, and these kind of stories are what's helped develop and inform our technology, but you need, and we all need, a single view of our customers across all different social media platforms. And that's what Engage kind of empowers customers to do. Lastly, a very quick one to mention, but we also very strongly recognize that communications aren't the start and end of every business. There are actually a lot of other tools, a lot of other things that a business uses, especially productivity tools and CRMs. And it's extremely important to recognize that a communication system, whoever provides it, needs to integrate very tightly into all of those different use cases. Because much as I sit every day working with my communications tools, a lot of knowledge workers are heavily embedded with Microsoft Word, G Suite, Salesforce as a CRM, and your communications need to empower those use cases, not replace them. So finally, just to finish up, I thought I'd share with you two very quick use cases of companies that have made very sort of significant business transformations off the back of taking RingCentral as their only communications platform. So one, Box, I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's a multinational business cloud storage company. And they're Silicon Valley based, just like RingCentral's headquarters, but we're obviously based over here. We have remote offices in Dublin as well as in London. Just so we're on the same page. But Box grew very quickly over the space of a year when they were in very heavy growth mode as a tech company, and they expanded from under 1,000 to over 2,000 employees, while also opening up offices worldwide. And they very very quickly found that as a side effect of that rapid expansion, they had many different communications platforms, 20 plus different communications platforms. So different phone systems, different WebEx, things like WebEx, different content sharing platforms. And that ended up being extremely expensive to manage as a business, having many different contracts, but also, like we were talking about before, quite a poor experience for employees wanting to speak to each other. What RingCentral did was more or less replace every other communications vendor, so unified the experience for the users, as well as quite significant cost savings to the business itself. And the second, a much more interesting one actually. So major retailer here in the UK, can't talk about them, the name directly. They may or may not have a very famous Christmas advert, but more than 40,000 retail workers in stores. And the way they used to operate was with physical phones. Their only communications device was physical plastic phones, physically tied to different retail desks, maybe store counters, maybe in the food sections, like the phones that sit at the butcher's counter or whatever. And there was a real problem for the ordinary retail workers kind of communicating with each other. They'd either have to go to these phones, which took them off the floor, took them out of circulation, and it was also very hard, to get messages directly to them. In parallel, they use Android devices for the majority of their user base to do things like stock checking, lookup of tools outside of communications. So what we said to them was, well, how about replacing all of your plastic and put RingCentral apps on all of these Android devices? So it's that multimodal piece again. And that not only brought communications to every individual single worker within their business, it also gave them a lot more than just voice. So one of the key things that they found is that, hey, asynchronous communications via messaging, via chat, actually adds a lot of value. You can send someone a message, tell them that they've got a task for later without having to interact with them in real time. So not only quite big cost savings because of a complete platform replacement, but also really enabled different modes of working for them. So those are just two stories. And in actual fact, we've got a whole bunch of other ways we could transform businesses. But hopefully, some of those resonate with you guys just a little bit. I think I've run over a little bit, but hopefully, if you guys have questions, please shout now, and please feel free to follow up with me later. I'll be around the room. I'll probably be hanging around the sort of ghastly orange banners with RingCentral on near the front. Thanks.